Hello my friends and welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. In this one, I'm taking my first look at some weapon builds you can set up once you've unlocked level 3 traders and have access to Mechanic's sweet stockpile of weapon attachments. With the recoil rework making pretty much every gun viable, there's a ton of options once you've gotten this far in the progression. And since meta attachments are no longer a requirement to run many weapons, tons of stuff that was once just not worth using are now very practical and fun to run, so there's a lot more freedom than in previous wipes. For this first look at level 3 traders on the channel, I've got 3 assault rifles and 2 SMGs that I want to recommend, starting with an old favorite of mine, the SA-58. This rifle was once a dominant force in the Tarkov ecosystem, but sadly over time it fell from grace and was pushed out by fierce competition from the semi-auto 7.62 weapons like the SR-25 and the M1A. After the recoil rework though, the SA-58 feels like a completely different rifle, even with fairly mid-range attachments that are available at level 3 traders. Unfortunately, you can't put a sight or any other attachments onto this thing until you get to level 3 mechanic, but once you do get that unlocked, you can make quite a nice simple SA-58. Because player scavs spawn with this rifle, you can also pick this thing up for a pretty reasonable price on the flea market, usually around 50 to 60,000 rubles. Just make sure you get one at around 93 durability or higher so you can avoid weapon malfunctions. The first thing you want to swap out on the SA-58 is the muzzle device. At level 3 traders, I think one of the best options is to add on the Thunderbeast 30CB muzzle device, and then you can attach the Thunderbeast Ultra 5 suppressor onto that. This thing's usually around 40,000 rubles on the market, so it's pretty reasonable for a 7.62 suppressor. For a more budget setup that also doesn't build up as much heat and cause jams, I would say that the M11 Severe Duty Muzzle Brake is a good choice from Peacekeeper level 3 for only about 80 bucks. Next, I replaced the default handguard with the SA-58 Key Mod handguard from Mechanic. There's also an M-Lock handguard available here that's nearly identical, but the Key Mod has slightly better heat and cooling stats. This handguard needs some key mod rails for attachments, and then I add the new RTM Osavets P2 foregrip and an X400 flashlight. This foregrip has identical stats to the RK1 grip, but it's half the price, so for recoil control builds, it's kind of a no-brainer. As an alternative, I would also recommend the Magpul RVG foregrip for a lot more ergonomics, which can be helpful on the suppressed SA-58. The next big upgrade for the SA-58 is the Extreme Duty Dust Cover from Mechanic, which is the only way to get a sight onto this rifle. You can add whatever sight you prefer, but I've honestly really been enjoying the Romeo 4 reflex sight mounted onto an aim point with a riser. Next, you want to replace the stock, and for most SA-58 builds, I would say the BRS stock from Mechanic is the ideal choice. Finally, you can swap out the pistol grip for the SA-58 saw grip, and then the build is pretty much done. This thing can still be a little jumpy when you spray too much in full auto, especially while standing, but this mid-range build honestly feels better than I remember the meta SA-58 did last wipe, so I'm enjoying it quite a lot. Next up for this video, I want to take a look at the AUG, which is now maybe one of the smoothest 5.56 rifles to fire in full auto, and it's pretty simple to get set up with a nice build, though you sadly have to wait until Peacekeeper level 3 to get a good sight mount to replace the carry handle scope. It's also not really an expensive build, being sold by Peacekeeper level 3 for only about $600. I would personally stick with the AUG A3 that he sells at level 3, but the stats on the A1 version are only slightly worse. So if you find that one in a weapon box or something, it is fine to use, you just need to swap out the receiver for the modernized one from Peacekeeper. The first addition that you want to make on this gun is to add the Ratworks muzzle adapter from Mechanic, which allows you to attach AR-15 muzzle devices. After this, I go for the KAC QDC 5.56 compensator and then attach the KAC NT4 suppressor, which is only about 30,000 rubles on the flea market. I tested out several more expensive suppressors, and this one had identical or even better ergonomic stats, so I'm sticking with this one. Next, you can add the AUG A3 M1 low sight mount to get a top rail. For my builds on this, I really like using the Elcan Spectre 1-4 scope, which is very reasonably priced at $300 from Peacekeeper, and it gives a lot of versatility. You can also add a flashlight or laser onto the side rail of the AUG A3 receiver. And just like that, the build is pretty much finished. This gun is very easy to set up, it's fairly cheap to purchase, and it performs just as well as other 5.56 options like the SCAR and the MDR. Personally, I'm loving how much freedom we have to make simple but very effective 5.56 builds in this patch, and the AUG gets a big thumbs up from me. For the third assault rifle build in this video, I have another extremely simple build that I really want to talk about simply because of how much it's improved since the last patch and how much fun I've had every time I've used it. The AK-12 was added in the last wipe, and honestly it was kind of a disaster. It had ridiculous recoil, a high flea market price, a suppressor that you just couldn't get until level 4 proper unless you wanted to be price gouged on the market, and in general, I just felt like it wasn't even worth using when I tried it. After the recoil rework though, I've found myself going back to the AK-12 almost every time I feel like running a 5.45 rifle, because it just feels really nice to shoot even with just a very basic build. It still does have some problems for sure, like the fact that you still can't get the suppressor for a reasonable price until proper level 4. But that being said, you can pick up the AK-12 for about 50 to 70,000 rubles on the flea market, and then really just add 3 attachments and have yourself a pretty nice 5.45 rifle to run raids with. Once you have proper level 3, you can also fix up scav AK-12s by adding the dust cover, compensator, and buffer tube back onto them. So if you see them on the market with 90 plus durability for a cheap price, it's an easy fix. Really the only attachments you need to worry about for the AK-12 is a foregrip, stock, tactical device, and an optic. First up, I like to add the new Ossavet's P2 foregrip, which adds some good recoil reduction onto the build. I also put on an X400 flashlight onto the side rail. Next, I swap out the AK-12 buttstock for the VLTOR E-Mod stock, one of the most cost-effective stock upgrades after the rework of attachment stats. For another ergonomics boost, I also swap out the pistol grip for the Tango Down battle grip, which gives a pretty big ergonomics boost for a reasonable price. Finally, I just add a sight onto the AK-12 and the build is done. I've been using the Romeo 4 reflex sight on a riser quite a lot this wipe, and I've really enjoyed it. Overall, you can certainly make an AK-74 or RPK-16 that works like an AK-12, and I do plan on covering those in a future video, because there's a lot more versatility for those builds since there's more attachments. But the extra 50 RPM fire rate on the AK-12 can definitely be the difference between winning and losing a fight. And personally, the sound of firing an AK-12 without a suppressor is one of the most satisfying things for me in Tarkov right now. To wrap up this video, I want to recommend 2 SMGs that you can really start making effective use of once you hit level 3 traders. First up, we have the MP7, one of the only weapons in Tarkov history that has never once fallen out of favor with the community. It was good 4 years ago, and it's still good today. It really has stood the test of time better than almost any other single weapon in Tarkov. At level 3 mechanic, you get access to the 30 round mags for the MP7, so you can have a decent ammo pool while running it. You can also buy the JSP SX ammunition at level 3 mechanic, which has a good balance of AP and flesh damage for the price, being very similar to 9mm AP rounds. The MP7 also has a surprisingly low flea market price at the time of making this video anyway, with both the A1 and A2 version being sold for about 30 to 40,000 rubles on the market. For this build, I'll be focusing on the A2 version, but if you get an MP7 A1, literally the only difference is that you can't add a foregrip. First up, I say it's always a good idea to add the MP7 Rotex suppressor, which you can buy on the flea market. The price does fluctuate, but every time I've checked lately, it's around the same price as level 4 mechanic sells it, about 60,000 rubles. Next, I add the Ossavet's P2 foregrip for extra recoil control, and then an X400 flashlight as my tactical device. After this, the only other attachment you need is an optic. I've been trying out the SIG Romeo 8T holographic sight and finding it quite nice with a wide field of view, but you can add whatever red dot you like best. You can also add some backup iron sights for +2 ergonomics, but it's not really necessary, so I'll leave that one up to you. The other SMG that I want to mention is basically the MP7's Russian doppelganger, the SR2M, firing the 9x21 round, which has pretty similar stats to the MP7 ammo, but at a slightly cheaper price. The SR2M is available from proper level 3 for about 50,000 rubles and on the flea market for about the same price or even cheaper depending on the day. While the gun is slightly more expensive than the MP7, the suppressor is much cheaper, so really the price ends up being quite similar. The stats of 9x21 ammo have changed a lot in this current patch, but at level 3 proper you can buy the new 7U4 ammo, which is pretty equivalent to the JSP ammo for the MP7. Then as a backup, you can buy the PS ammo from Proper Level 2, which is not quite as good, but it can still get the job done. Just like the MP7, the first edition that I make is a suppressor, which can be found for 25,000 rubles at Proper Level 3. The SR2M should have a rail on the side by default, so you can add a flashlight or a laser of your choice onto the build. The only other part that you really need is the B17 mount from Skier, which allows you to add red dot sights on top of the dust cover. For my build, I like to use the Delta Point Reflex sight, but you can add whatever red dot sight you prefer. I think the MP7 overall has better stats on the ammo, but the SR2M is more controllable to shoot in full auto in my opinion. And really I think either of them is a great choice for a little SMG to run on CQB raids. And that basically covers it for this look at some builds from the level 3 traders. I definitely plan on doing follow-ups to this video for level 3 traders covering some of the usual suspects like the AKM, the AK-74, the M4, and stuff like that. But for this one I figured I'd start with some stuff like the SA-58 and the AK-12 that saw massive improvements from last wipe. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know what you think of the builds if you try them for yourself, as well as any recommendations for stuff to check out at this level after the recoil patch. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got a link to my Twitch stream down below if you want to check out some of my Tarkov gameplay live. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.